The plasma membrane is also known as the phospholipid bilayer, and it surrounds all cells, prokaryotic and eukaryotic. The plasma membrane is the boundary between the outside of the cell and the inside of the cell. And what this does is it creates a boundary in order to only let certain things in and out of the cell. So by allowing only certain things in and out of the cell, we call the plasma membrane selectively permeable. So the plasma membrane has selective permeability because it only allows certain molecules to pass through while keeping others out, or it keeps certain molecules in without letting them go to the outside environment. What this does is it actually allows for homeostasis within the cell and maintains a specific cell environment that is needed for the organism to function. The structure of the plasma membrane is mainly composed of the lipid called a phospholipid and proteins. All plasma membranes, whether it's from a prokaryote or eukaryote, contains the lipid component and the proteins. Eukaryotic cells also have carbohydrates and steroids within their plasma membrane. The phospholipid part of the plasma membrane makes up the majority of the structure, and there is a phosphate head. So as you can see, we've got the phosphate group right here, and a lipid tail. So this area includes the glycerol backbone and 2 fatty acid chains. As you can see, those fatty acids can be unsaturated. The area that is the lipid part of the molecule, that's the area that is circled here in red, is the hydrophobic area of the molecule. The head part is the hydrophilic. So what that does is that allows the hydrophilic head to point outwards towards the liquid environment outside and inside of the cell, and the hydrophobic tails point in towards one another, creating a membrane between the inside and outside of the cell. So here we've got those all along the top are our hydrophilic heads pointing out into the environment and into the cell. And then on the inside, these are all of our phospholipid tails that we call fatty acid tails. All of these, there's 2 of them, point in towards one another. So this area is hydrophilic, and the inside is hydrophobic. So we have those 2 layers that point in towards one another that creates that membrane. And finally, you'll see these 4 carbon ring structures. Those are cholesterol. And the cholesterol helps to stabilize the phospholipids because the phospholipids are fluid. They are able to move around one another. Every once in a while, they might flip from one side to the other. All of your eukaryotic cells contain cholesterol except for fungus. Fungal cells contain a steroid called ergosterol. Okay, another part of the plasma membrane are the carbohydrates. So if you remember, carbohydrates are chains of simple sugars like glucose. So if this is the outside of the cell, our carbohydrate chains are sticking out off of the bilayer surface into the exterior environment, the extracellular matrix. So you'll see glycoproteins. A glycoprotein is a protein that has a carbohydrate chain hanging off of it, and they allow for cell signaling. They anchor cells to one another, and which is also cell adhesion. These carbohydrate chains, if you remember, they're also called, so our carbohydrate chain can also be called a polysaccharide because there's more than one monomer. You will also see them referred to as oligosaccharides. One example of a glycoprotein that is used are the blood glycoproteins. So if you have A, B, or O blood type, it depends on the carbohydrate chain that is on specific glycoproteins of your red blood cells. Glycolipids, right here, that is carbohydrate chain that hangs off of a lipid, protect the cell from cell damage and help make sure that the cell stays fluid. One of the big components besides the phospholipids are the proteins. And as you can see, we can have several different types of proteins. They do act as receptors. They receive chemical signals, for example, hormones from other cells. That means they can also send signals to other cells. Items get transported through the phospholipid bilayer into or out of the cell through our proteins. They also help maintain the structure. And you'll also see enzymes on the inside of membranes of some of your organelles that carry out important functions. They anchor cells from one to another, and they also allow for the cytoskeleton of the cell to anchor itself to the cytoplasm and to the plasma membrane. And then there's also cell-to-cell adhesion, which allows one cell to adhere or to be close to another cell. And finally, you have the transduction of energy, or the production of energy within the cell, for example, through the process of cellular respiration. So some of your enzymes are embedded within the membrane. You will find these embedded in organelles like mitochondria and chloroplasts. And these aid in the production of molecules. So for example, there is an enzyme called ATP synthase that puts together ATP molecules within the mitochondria whenever the body is going through cellular respiration. Another type of protein is a transport protein. So this is a transport protein, and this is a transport protein, which is also a glycoprotein because you can see the carbohydrate chains on there. And these have to go through the entire phospholipid bilayer, and this allows them to regulate what cells go in, what molecules go in and out of the cell. For example, if the body needs a particular ion, like a magnesium ion or a calcium ion, it allows for those to be pumped through into the cell, or if something has been made by the cell, it allows them to be pumped out. So one type of transport protein is a carrier protein, and these actually escort molecules through the membrane, and they require energy in the form of ATP. The second type of transport protein is a channel protein. So as you can see, the molecule can go straight through. These can either be facilitated, or they can just be simply a channel, but all of these, because they are proteins, must match the substrate that they are working with. So they cannot just allow anything in and out of the cell. They will only allow particular molecules in and out. Okay, we also have what are called peripheral proteins, and those are on the inside or outside of the plasma membrane. If some of them work in conjunction with other transmembrane proteins, or those are your transport proteins that go all the way through the cell membrane. So here's your transmembranal, goes all the way through. This is also an integral protein because it is embedded in the plasma membrane, but it does not go all the way through. So a transmembrane protein must go all the way through. Your peripheral proteins can be attached to either of those and help in their function. They can also be just on the surface and allow for the cytoplasm or extracellular matrix to be attached. We call the model of the plasma membrane the fluid mosaic model. Fluid because the plasma membrane itself is fluid. It is constantly changing. The molecules can move around one another. They can flip. They can dissolve depending on what is needed by the cell. And mosaic, because if you look at a picture of it, it looks like a mosaic picture with all different types of molecules embedded throughout the membrane. So here's a large picture. As you can see, we've got our peripheral proteins. This is helping an integral protein, also called a transmember protein because it goes all the way through. Here's our cholesterol, aiding in stability. We have our double layer of our phospholipids. Here's a carbohydrate chain, also called an oligosaccharide. Because it's coming off of a phospholipid, it's a glycolipid. Here's a carbohydrate chain coming off of a protein, so it's a glycoprotein. And as you can see here, our peripheral protein is also aiding in connecting to the cytoskeleton of the inside of the cell, which allows for structure as well. So here's how all this gets put together. So on the outside of every single cell is a phospholipid bilayer, and on every single one of the membrane-bound organelles, there is also a cell, not a cell membrane because it's an organelle, but a fluid membrane that covers each one of those. And depending on the organelle, it will have different things embedded within that membrane. The cell membrane must have all of those components if it's a eukaryotic cell. Again, a prokaryotic cell has only the lipids and the proteins. So here is everything broken apart.